Hi guys, I'm Rear Admiral Owen Swart with the Federation Starship Dauntless, here with another episode of Star Trek Apologetics. And I want to start with an apology. I'm not wearing my usual Class B uniform today. I'm wearing my Class C leisure uniform. I usually prefer to be a bit more formal in these videos. I like the formality of the SDU, but I'm traveling at the moment. I'm not in my usual home sector, and since I'm made Admiral, my bulky STU no longer fits in my luggage. It's no longer practical for me to cart it around the place. So it's going to be my LU today. That's how it's going to be. Alright, I also want to apologize for the slightly diminished audio quality of this video. As I mentioned, I'm traveling, which means that I don't have my usual bulky audio set up with me, so I've had to make do. Hopefully this won't be too distracting, but let's jump into it. Alright, for today's Star Trek Apologetics, I want to deal with a question that came up on the Daystrom Institute Reddit subreddit. I'm not going to read out the whole question. It was fairly verbose. I'm just going to get to the core of it, which was something like this: was the Enterprise XCV 300 a Vulcan loan ship? So there's a lot of stuff packed into that question, which I thought might be fun to pull apart and explore those different concepts. Now, first of all, what is the Enterprise XCV 300? What is that? Well, back in Star Trek, in the motion picture, those of us who were paying particular attention to the details will have noticed a couple of scenes that were set on the recreation deck of the Starship Enterprise. And on one of the walls, there were a few panels, paintings, illustrations of some kind of various other vessels named Enterprise, including the Space Shuttle Enterprise, the aircraft carrier Enterprise, and the USS Enterprise that we knew. But there was also an unusual different one, a vessel that we hadn't seen before. It had these sort of round cylindrical nacelles. The painting looked like this, and it wasn't clear what that was. But over the years, we've been able to speculate, and there's been behind the scenes information that has popped up about it, and we could try and piece together what this thing was. So what we're looking at here is what's called the Enterprise XCV 300, according to behind the scenes information. This was a vessel named Enterprise that predates the Enterprise NX-01, so it's before the time of the Enterprise TV series. And it looked very different to any other starship that we've seen, at least Federation starship or Earth starship, because it had these big round nacelles. It seems to have been in service in the early 22nd century, sort of 2120, 2130, somewhere around there. According to the background information, so there's a fair amount of contradictory information, but it seems that the best source is probably the Star Trek Encyclopedia. I think it's around the 3rd or 4th edition, where they tell us that firstly it was called the SS Enterprise. Conspicuously absent is the U in that prefix. The USS usually indicates that it's a United Earth starship or a United Federation of Planets starship. Obviously this is before the Federation was founded, so it's not a Federation starship. At that point, the United Earth hadn't yet begun using the USS prefix for their names, as we know from the Enterprise TV series. The NX-01 didn't have a USS. So SS Enterprise, that's an interesting factoid. It tells us a little bit about it, but not a lot of useful information. Doesn't get us any closer to what this ship was and what it did. But again, Star Trek Encyclopedia fills us in with some more information. Apparently this was a class of vessel called a Starliner. It seems to have been relatively small, at least if you look at the long spindly bit of the hull. It seems to have been quite small, and probably had a crew of about 35 people. And her mission, it seems to have been to travel from Earth to Alpha Centauri, carrying a small group of, I'm not sure if crew is the right word, passengers perhaps, probably early colonists for the Alpha Centauri colony. It's not entirely clear. We don't have a crew manifest. We don't know who these people were. We only have little bits and pieces to work with. But that's what it seems to be. This vessel, the SS Enterprise, seems to have been an early exploratory vessel, or perhaps a transport vessel for colonists that was sent to Alpha Centauri. It probably, based on the timing, probably had a warp drive capable of about warp factor 2, which is relatively slow compared to other vessels named Enterprise. Now, this is not the only time that we see the SS Enterprise. Although we've never seen the actual ship on screen, we've seen it referred to in a number of other places. We've got this painting and mission patch on the wall of the 602 Club on Earth in the mid-22nd century. So this is during the Warp 5 program, but before the actual NX-01 has actually been launched. There's a similar painting on the wall of Admiral Maxwell's office. I say Admiral Maxwell Forrest's office on Earth at a similar time, or about 10 years later, during the mission of the Enterprise NX-01. Obviously, this was a vessel that was of interest to these people. We're not clear on what it did or what its role in history was, but it was obviously important to these people. And in the Kelvin timeline, in Into Darkness, we see a model of it sitting on Admiral Marcus's desk. So again, this is clearly a historic vessel that played some important role. We're not clear on exactly what that role is, but it's an important thing. But what sets it aside and what makes it special is it has these big round warp nacelles, which is very different to, as I said, other Earth technology, which has these outrigger nacelles, which are long, thin cylinders, which have all of the warp coils packed inside them, which then is able to generate the warp field that way. For some reason, this vessel has what looks like much larger warp coils, but fewer of them surrounding the entire ship, which again is not unprecedented in the whole of Star Trek. We've seen a few different Vulcan vessels which have a similar design. The Vulcan Surak class and Dakir class cruisers have the same sort of large, short warp nacelles that surround the entire vessel. Other older Vulcan ships have a similar design, these big arcs on the side, but they don't meet at the top and bottom. They're open for some reason. It's not clear why that's the case, but that seems to be a standard design for Vulcans. So this is probably what led this Redditor to ask the question: was the SS Enterprise a Vulcan loan ship? First of all, I'm going to say no, because although the shape of the warp drive looks kind of Vulcan, the rest of the ship really doesn't look very Vulcan at all. I mean, the spindly little bits, the angular shaped pylons, it really doesn't have that smooth, organically shaped Vulcan style of design at all. It doesn't look like a Vulcan ship to me at all. Now that's a fairly subjective assessment, but when you're talking about things like architecture, these things are important. But now there are three possible conclusions that we can draw from this, which might go some way to answering the question. Firstly, we can guess that it might have been a human designed and built ship, which I maintain it probably is, based on the general appearance of it, the big round warp nacelles aside. But it may have been drawing inspiration from Vulcan warp drive technology, so that Vulcan warp technology would have been known to the ship designers of the time. Although what we learned from the plot elements in Enterprise was that they wouldn't have had explicit access to that technology. They might at least have been able to observe those Vulcan warp vessels in action and use that as an inspiration in designing their own warp systems. Obviously, the NX program went in a different way. They stuck with the long, thin nacelles that were present in Zefram Cochrane's original design, the Phoenix, like this. But it might represent a short-term departure from that standard, in a way of exploring alternate ways of achieving warp drive. Or it's possible that it could be some kind of a hybrid vessel. It could have been an old Vulcan warp drive that the Vulcans had gifted to humans for the construction of this vessel for some reason, and then a human ship was built around that old warp drive. That seems a little improbable to me, based on the behavior that we've seen from the Vulcans. The odds of them handing over a fully functional warp drive to the humans seems unlikely, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility. Or, now here's an interesting one, that this is entirely a human design and has the superficial similarity to Vulcan ship design is entirely coincidental. And this is one that I favor, and here's why. In present day, in 2018, that's the current year, we actually have technology that kind of sort of looks like this. So a few years ago, a man by the name of Miguel Alcubierre, who is a Mexican theoretical physicist, released some information about an idea that he'd been toying with around what he calls the Alcubierre metric, or what we all like to call the Alcubierre warp drive. So in other words, he's come up with some equations, the mathematical description for what could actually kind of sort of make a warp drive work. Now we're not talking about engineering schematics for an actual engine that could do it. He's talking about the basic maths around how a warp drive could work, how it could function. But kind of inherent in his ideas around how this warp drive would work, he's at least postulated what a vessel capable of warp drive might look like. And key in all of the renderings that I've seen of it, here's one, and here's another one, is that it has this big round warp nacelle with the little ship in the middle. It appears to be, I don't pretend to understand the maths, but that appears to be consistent across pretty much all of the visualizations I've seen of the Alcubierre warp drive, and I'm guessing that's because it's in some way important to how it works. You kind of need that big warp nacelle on the outside surrounding the ship in order to create the warp field using the Alcubierre metric. And it's not even all that obscure. You may have seen these images that NASA put out a couple of years ago of what a NASA Starship using the Alcubierre warp drive might look like, and I'm sure I'm not alone in noticing that the superficial similarity between this and the SS Enterprise. So that's my hypothesis on how this all works. Obviously, we don't have any definitive answers on that because Canon hasn't yet filled in those blanks. Maybe someday they will. Maybe they'll just leave it open for us, like many other mysteries that have yet to be answered. But I'm fairly confident in my assessment that the SS Enterprise is a 100% human-built ship. It's consistent with what we know about Star Trek canon and what we know about the real world, which is that's the best kind of solution we can come up with in Star Trek Apologetics. All right. That's all of that for now. If you have any questions or if you've got something you'd like me to cover in a future one of these episodes, if you think I've missed something in my analysis of this question, or if there's something else you'd like me to go through that's been bothering you forever, please, comments are down below. You can find me on Discord or on Twitter, Facebook, all kinds of places. Let me have your questions. I'd love to address them. This is the kind of thing that's fun for me. And next week we'll be back to my normal videos, and I'll do another one of these Star Trek Apologetics videos at some point in the not too distant future. Alright, that's it for now. SWAT out.